The neighbor was Mrs. Patterson. She had lived next door for 30 years. I was walking my dog past her hydrangeas when she looked up from her gardening and said, "I was so sorry to hear about the house." I stopped. "What about the house?" Her face changed. She stood up slowly, brushed dirt off her knees. "Oh," she said, "you didn't know." That was how I learned that Gary sold the house. 3 months ago. I did not know it was for sale. I did not know it was listed. I did not know it had sold. I found out from a neighbor who assumed I had been told. Gary said it at my mother's funeral. I was standing in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I learned to bake, where I did my homework, where my mother taught me to make pie crust. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "This house will always be your home. Nothing changes. This is still your home. Always." I believed him. Not because I trusted Gary. Because I wanted to believe that something, anything, would stay the same. My mother was gone. The house was the only thing left that still smelled like her. The creaky floorboard in the hallway. The crack in the bathroom tile. The way the afternoon light came through the kitchen window at 4 o'clock. I wanted to believe that I could still walk through that door and feel like I belonged somewhere. 8 months later, I found out from a neighbor with dirt on her gardening gloves. Mrs. Patterson said she was sorry to hear about the house. I said, "What about the house?" She looked at me. Her face fell. "Oh," she said. "You didn't know." The house was sold. I had not been told. The house would always be my home, until it wasn't. And Gary did not think I deserved to know when that happened. My name is Laura. I am 36 years old, and for 18 years, that house on Maple Street was the only constant I had. My mother bought it when I was a child before Gary. She painted my room yellow. She planted roses by the front door. When she got sick, the cancer moved fast, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. There was no time to talk about the house. No time to talk about anything. The funeral was on a Tuesday. Gray sky. Too many flowers. Gary stood by the door, shaking hands, accepting condolences. He looked like a man who had been crying. I did not know if the tears were real. I wanted them to be real. After the service, he pulled me aside. We stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen where my mother taught me to roll pie dough. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Your mother loved this house. She would want you to always have a place here. Nothing changes. You hear me? Nothing changes. This house will always be your home." I cried. I hugged him. I said, "Thank you, Gary." He said, "You are family. That is what family does." I believed him. Not because I was naive. Because I was grieving. And grieving people want to believe that someone is telling the truth. You want to believe that the world will not shift entirely under your feet. That someone will hold the door open. That a promise made at a funeral is different from a promise made on a Tuesday afternoon. It is not. A promise is a promise. But grief makes you forget that. I did not ask for the promise in writing. I did not ask what always meant. I did not ask what would happen if Gary remarried or needed money or simply changed his mind. I trusted him. I would regret that trust. But I did not know that yet. I drove home that day to my own apartment. I thought about the yellow bedroom, the roses, the creaky floorboard in the hallway. I told myself that I could go back whenever I wanted, that the house was still there, that Gary would keep his word. I was wrong about all of it, but I did not find that out until 8 months later, from a neighbor with dirt on her gardening gloves. And by then, the house was already sold. I visited the house after the funeral. Not often. Once a month, maybe. I had my own apartment across town, but I told myself I needed to check in, to feel the kitchen floor under my feet, to sit at the table where my mother used to read the newspaper. Gary was always there. Polite. Distant. He did not mention the house. He did not mention the future. He talked about the weather, his golf game, his plans to travel. I would drink coffee. I would listen. Then I would leave. The visits got shorter. Not because Gary was rude. Because he was not there. His body was in the house. His mind was already somewhere else. I could feel it. The way he looked at his phone when I was talking. The way he said sure when I asked about the roses. He was a man who had already left. He just had not packed his bags yet. I called a friend. I said, I don't know why I keep going over there. It does not feel like home anymore. It feels like a house where my mother used to live. She asked if I had talked to Gary about it. I said, he is not really a talker. She said, he talked at the funeral. I paused. Then I said, that was a performance. I think the performance is over. I stopped visiting. Not because I was angry, because there was nothing for me there. Gary was not my family. He was my mother's husband. And with my mother gone, the connection had frayed. I did not ask him what his plans were. I did not ask if the house would stay in the family. I was afraid of the answer. I was also afraid that asking would make me seem greedy. Like I was circling the property, waiting for him to die. I was not. I just wanted to know that the yellow bedroom would still be there, that the roses would still bloom, that someone would remember that a little girl had grown up in that house and that her mother had loved it. I said nothing. I watched. I waited. I would learn, too late, that watching and waiting is not protection. It is postponement. You do not keep a house by hoping. You keep it by asking, by putting things in writing, by being willing to have an uncomfortable conversation. I was not willing, so I lost the house. Not because Gary stole it, because I gave it away, quietly, politely, one unasked question at a time. That is the part one am still learning to forgive myself for. Not his betrayal, my own silence. I called Rachel as soon as I got home from Mrs. Patterson's garden. Rachel had never trusted Gary. Not because he did anything specific. Because, she said, he had empty eyes. I did not know what that meant until after the funeral. Then I started to understand. I told her what happened. The hydrangeas. Mrs. Patterson's face. The house sold 3 months ago. I found out from a neighbor. Rachel was quiet for a second. Then she said, he did not tell you? No. He sold your mother's house and did not tell you? It was his house too. They owned it together. She said, he told you it would always be your home. That was a lie. And you found out from someone who waters petunias. I sat on my couch. The phone was warm against my ear. I did not know what to say. Rachel asked, what are you going to do? I do not know. Call him? Confront him? He owes you an explanation. Does he? Legally, the house was theirs. He inherited her share. He can do what he wants. Rachel's voice got sharper. I am not talking about legally. I am talking about being a person. He told you that house would always be your home. He sold it without telling you. That is not legal. That is human. And he failed. I started to cry, not because I was sad about the house, because Rachel was giving me permission to be angry. I had been telling myself I had no right. Gary inherited the house. He could sell it. That was the law. But Rachel was right. The law was not the point. The point was the promise. The point was the funeral. The point was that a man put his hand on my shoulder and said, nothing changes, and then changed everything without a word. I wiped my face. I said, I do not know if I can grieve a house the way I grieve a person. Rachel said, you can. And he owes you that grief. Not the house. Not the money. The grief. He owes you the chance to say goodbye to it. And he did not give you that. I had not thought of it that way. The house was not just a building. It was the place where my mother taught me to bake, where I scraped my knee on the driveway, where I cried over boys and celebrated birthdays. I deserved to know it was leaving. I deserved to walk through it one last time. Gary took that from me. Not the equity, the goodbye. And I did not know if I could forgive that. I did not know if I wanted to. I called Gary on a Sunday afternoon. I had been putting it off for 3 days. Rachel said I should do it. She said, what do you want from him? I said, I want him to know that he hurt me. She said, then tell him. He answered on the third ring. His voice was the same.
Casual.
Like nothing had happened. I asked, did you sell the house? He said, yes. I said, you did not tell me. There was a pause. Then he said, I did not think you would want to know. I felt something cold move through my chest. I said, you told me it would always be my home. At the funeral, you put your hand on my shoulder and said nothing changes. He said, that was before your mother died. Things change. I sat down on my kitchen floor. The phone was pressed to my ear. I did not know what to say. I realized in that moment that Gary did not see what he did wrong. He sold the house. He did not tell me. He thought those were neutral facts. He did not understand that the promise was not a legal document. It was a bond. And he broke it. I said, you should have told me. He said, I am sorry you feel that way.
He was not sorry.
He was sorry I was upset. There is a difference. I hung up. I did not cry. I was too angry to cry. But I was also too tired to fight. Gary had moved on. The house was sold. The money was in his account. I was sitting on my kitchen floor, holding a phone, listening to a dial tone. That was the end. Not a fight. A dial tone. I did not call him back. I did not write a letter. I did not consult a lawyer. I had learned that some people cannot hear you. Gary was one of those people. I was done speaking to people who cannot hear. I stayed on the floor for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. My mother's recipe box was on the counter. I had taken it from the house months ago, before Gary started boxing things up. I opened it sometimes, just to see her handwriting, just to remember that someone had loved me enough to write down how to make pie crust. The house was gone. The promise was gone. Gary was gone. But the recipe box was still here. That was not nothing. That was something. I just did not know if it was enough. I drove to the house on a Saturday. I had not been there since I stopped visiting. The new owners were moving in. Boxes on the lawn. A couch on the curb. A family I did not know. A woman carried a box through the front door. A child ran across the grass. My childhood bedroom would be someone else's office. The roses my mother planted were gone. Pulled out. Replaced with something else. I did not know what. I did not get close enough to see. I sat in my car across the street. The engine was off. The windows were down. I just watched. A man came out of the house. He walked toward my car. He knocked on the window. I rolled it down. He said, "Can I help you?" I said, "I used to live here."
His face softened. "Oh."
"Did you want to come in?" I shook my head.
"No."
"I just wanted to see it one more time." He asked, "Were you close with the previous owner?" I said, "He was my stepfather." He said, "He did not mention you." I said, "I know." I rolled up the window. I drove away. I did not cry. I called Rachel. She answered on the first ring. I told her what the man said. "He did not mention you." She asked, "Are you okay?" I said, "The new owners did not know I existed.
Gary did not tell them about me.
He just erased me. From the house. From the story. From everything." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is not erasure. That is who he is. He was never going to tell them about you. You were never part of his story. You were part of your mother's story. And she is gone. So you're gone too." I realized she was right. Gary did not sell the house out of malice. He sold it because he was done. Done with my mother. Done with me. Done with the performance of family. The house was not a betrayal. It was a confirmation. He was never family. He was just married to my mother. And now my mother is gone. And so is he. I pulled into my driveway. I sat in the car for a minute. I thought about the man at the house. The way he said he did not mention you. Not mean. Just factual. Like he was telling me the weather. Gary had moved on so completely that the people who bought his house did not even know I existed. That was not anger. That was just accuracy. And accuracy, I was learning, hurts more than anger. Because anger is a feeling. Accuracy is a fact. And the fact was, I had been erased. Not dramatically. Not cruelly. Just quietly. Like I had never been there at all. I did not contact Gary again. I did not ask for money. I did not ask for an apology. I was done asking for things from someone who had already shown me what he was willing to give. Nothing. That was his gift. I did not want it. I went inside. I made tea. I sat on my couch. I thought about the house, about whether it was possible to grieve the loss of someone who was never really there. Gary was a ghost wearing a stepfather's skin. He had never loved me. He had just performed love, because my mother was watching. When she stopped watching, he stopped performing. That was not betrayal. That was just the end of a play. I had been sitting in the audience, waiting for the next act. There was no next act. The theater was empty. And I was alone. That grief counted. It counted as much as the grief for my mother. Because both losses were real. One died. The other was never alive. And I had loved him anyway. Or I had loved the idea of him. The idea of a stepfather who would keep his promises.
Who would see me as family.
Who would not erase me the moment my mother closed her eyes. That idea was gone now. And I was grieving it. That was allowed. That was real. That was mine. I started sorting through my mother's things on a Sunday. Gary had dropped off 2 boxes at my apartment. He did not come inside. He left them on the doorstep. Photos. Letters. A recipe box. Things he did not want.
Things he thought I might want. He was probably right. He just did not care enough to ask.
I spread everything out on the living room floor. There was a photo of my mother in the kitchen. The same kitchen where Gary put his hand on my shoulder and promised the house would always be my home. She was laughing, holding a wooden spoon. She looked happy. I picked up the photo. I said, "He sold it, Mom." He did not tell me. I was talking to a photograph. It was not crazy. It was grief. Grief does not care about audience. Grief just wants to say the words out loud. Rachel came over later. She saw the boxes. She saw me sitting on the floor surrounded by my mother's life. She asked, "Are you going to keep the photo?" I said, "Yes. It is my mother. Not his. Not the house's. Hers."
She asked about the rest.
The furniture. The dishes. The things Gary had kept or sold or thrown away. I said, "I took what I wanted.
He can have the rest.
It was never really mine anyway." Rachel said, "The house was never really yours either. That is what you are learning." I nodded. I know. I am learning it. I did not tell Rachel about Mrs. Patterson again. About the petunias. About the new owners who did not know I existed. I had told that story enough times. Now, I was living the aftermath. The aftermath was quiet. It was not angry. It was just empty. The house was gone. My mother was gone. Gary was gone. I was not gone. I was still here. That was something. That was not nothing. I put the photo on my refrigerator. I put the recipe box on the counter. I made tea. I sat down. I thought about what to keep when the house is gone. The answer was not furniture or dishes or the yellow bedroom. The answer was the small things. The wooden spoon in the photo. The recipe for pie crust in my mother's handwriting. The memory of her laughing. Those things could not be sold. They could not be erased. They were mine. Not Gary's. Not the new owners. Mine. That was not victory. That was just the difference between a house and a home. One can be sold. The other cannot. And I was learning to carry my home with me. It was lighter than I expected. Not because I had lost so much. Because I had finally stopped carrying the weight of what I never had. A stepfather who kept his promises. A house that stayed in the family. A mother who did not die. Those were heavy things. I put them down. Not because I wanted to. Because I had to. The weight was breaking me. Now I am lighter. Not happy. Just lighter. That is something. I'm over at where silence ends. Subscribe if any of this sounds familiar. I saw Gary in the produce section of the grocery store. Months had passed. He looked older,
Softer.
like a man who had not been sleeping well. He saw me. He hesitated. Then he walked over. He said, "How are you?" I said, "You sold my mother's house and did not tell me."
He blinked.
"I did not think you would want to know." I set my basket down. "You told me it would always be my home. You said that at her funeral." He shifted his weight. "I meant it at the time." I looked at him. "You meant it at the time? That is not how promises work." He said, "Things change.
People change."
I could not stay in that house. It was too hard." I said, "It was hard for me too, but I did not get a vote." "It was not your house." I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, just certainty. "It was my home. You said it would always be my home. You said that. And then you sold it without telling me." I found out from a neighbor." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I am sorry." I asked, "Are you? Or are you sorry I am upset?" He did not answer.
He did not need to.
I already knew. I said, "I am not going to fight you. I am not going to sue you. I am just going to tell you that you hurt me."
And you did not have to.
You could have told me. You could have given me a chance to say goodbye to the house. You chose not to. That was a choice. And I want you to know that I know it was a choice." He started to say something. I held up my hand. "I am not asking for anything. I am just telling you. You hurt me. You did not have to.
You chose to.
That is all." I picked up my basket. I walked away. I did not look back.
I had said what I needed to say.
The rest was not my responsibility. I did not wait for Gary to apologize. I did not expect him to change. I had learned that some people cannot give you what you need. Gary was one of those people. I was done waiting for him to become someone else. I paid for my groceries. I drove home. I put the apples on the counter. I sat down. I thought about the question Rachel had asked months ago. Is it possible to forgive someone who does not understand what they did wrong? I did not know. I knew I was not going to spend my life waiting for Gary to understand. He would not. That was his limitation, not mine. Forgiveness was beside the point. The point was that I had told him the truth. He had heard it. What he did with it was his problem. I was not carrying it anymore. That was not forgiveness. That was just the difference between holding a stone and setting it down. I set it down. In the produce section, next to the avocados. And I walked away. That was enough. That was everything. I stopped thinking about Gary after the grocery store. Not deliberately. I just stopped. He became a person I used to know. Like a coworker from a job I left. The shape of him was still there. The weight was gone. I drive past the house sometimes. The new owners painted it. A different color. The roses are gone. The yellow bedroom is probably beige now. It looks different. It is different. It is not my house anymore. One afternoon I sat in my car across the street. I watched a woman hang laundry in the backyard. She had no idea that a little girl had learned to ride a bike on that driveway. That a mother had planted roses by the front door. That a family had lived and died in that house. To her, it was just a house. To me, it was the place where my mother used to be. But my mother was not there anymore. So the house was just a building. Rachel asked me later if I regretted not fighting for it. The house. I said, it was not mine to fight for. It was my mother's. And she is gone. Fighting for the house would have been fighting for something she did not need anymore. She asked, "What about the promise?" Gary's promise? I thought about it. That was never real. It was just something he said to make himself feel better. I believed it because I wanted to believe it. But wanting does not make something true. I did not tell Rachel about the grocery store conversation. I did not need to. Rachel already knew. She was the one who told me to confront him. I did. It did not change anything. But it did not need to change anything. The confrontation was for me, not for Gary. And it worked. I said what I needed to say. Now, I am done. Rachel asked me months ago what I wanted from him. I wanted him to know he hurt me. I told him. He knows. What he does with that knowledge is his problem. I am not responsible for his response. I am only responsible for my voice.
And I used it. I sat in my kitchen that night.
The recipe box was on the counter. The photo of my mother was on the refrigerator. I thought about the difference between closure and resignation. Closure sounds like an ending. Resignation sounds like giving up. I did not know which one I had found. I knew I was not waiting anymore. I was not hoping. I was not angry. I was just living. The house was gone. Gary was gone. My mother was gone. I was still here. That was not closure. That was not resignation. That was just the truth. And the truth I was learning is not a feeling. It is a fact. The fact was, I had lost things. I would keep losing things. That was life. The only choice was how to carry the losses. I chose to put them down, not because I was strong, because they were heavy, and I was tired of being crushed. So I put them down. That is not victory. That is just the difference between surviving and drowning. I chose surviving. It is not pretty. It is not heroic. It is just breathing, one breath at a time, in a kitchen that is mine, with a recipe box that belonged to my mother. That is enough. That has to be enough. I bought a plant on a Saturday, a small fern from the nursery down the street. I put it on my windowsill. It is not a house. It is not my childhood. It is just a plant. I water it. I talk to it sometimes. That is not crazy. That is just what people do when they're learning to take care of something that is theirs. I visited my mother's grave on a Tuesday. The cemetery was quiet. I sat on the grass. I said, Gary sold the house. I do not know if you would have minded. I think you would have. But I cannot ask you. So I am just going to assume you would have told me. Because you would have. You would have told me. I stayed for a while. Then I drove home. The fern was still on the windowsill. Still green. Still alive. That is something. I sat on my couch that night. I looked around my apartment. The recipe box on the counter. The photo on the refrigerator. The plant by the window. I said to myself, quietly, he said the house would always be my home. It was not. It was never mine. It was my mother's. And when she died, it became his. He sold it. He did not tell me. I found out from a neighbor. That was 4 years ago. I do not think about it every day anymore. I think about it less and less. The house is gone. My mother is gone. Gary is gone. I am not gone. I am here. In my apartment. With a plant on the windowsill. That is not a house. But it is a home. My home. The one I made. Not the one I was promised. The one I made. I did not tell anyone about the plant. I did not post about it. I did not make it a symbol. It is just a plant. But it is my plant. In my home. The home that no one can sell without telling me. Because it is mine. Not borrowed. Not promised. Mine. That is the difference between being a child in someone else's house and being an adult in your own. I am an adult now. It took me a long time to feel like one. But I feel it. Finally. Not because of the house. Because of the plant. Because I bought it. Because I water it. Because it is still alive. That is not victory. That is the difference between waiting for someone to keep a promise and keeping one to yourself. I kept my own promise. I made a home. Not the one I grew up in. A new one. Small. Quiet. Mine. That is where the silence ends. Not with a confrontation. With a plant on a windowsill. Watered. Alive. Enough. I'm over at where silence ends. Have you ever lost a place you called home and realized the home was never the house at all?